As a kid, I never thought I'd end up in a story like this, but here I am, typing away, hoping someone will believe me. It all started on my 21st birthday. I'm a college student, and like any other student, I was always looking for ways to make some extra cash. So when I saw this flyer about a psychological experiment that paid, I thought, why not? The experiment was at this old building on the outskirts of town. It looked creepy, but I brushed off the feeling. I needed the money. Inside, I met Dr. Felix, a guy who seemed nice but kind of weird. He explained that the experiment was about testing human reactions to different situations. It sounded simple enough. The first few days were easy. They asked me questions, made me watch some weird videos, and took notes. But then, things started getting strange. One day, they put me in a room with nothing but a chair and a mirror. I sat there for what felt like hours. When I looked in the mirror, I swear I saw something move behind me. But when I turned around, nothing was there. It freaked me out, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Each day, the experiments got weirder and more intense. I started hearing whispers when no one was around, and sometimes the lights would flicker for no reason. I wanted to quit, but I needed the money. And besides, a part of me was curious to see what would happen next. Then came the day that changed everything. They took me to a new room, much colder and darker than the others. In the center was a strange machine, something out of a sci-fi movie. Dr. Felix told me it was a new part of the experiment. He said it would help them understand how the mind works when it's pushed to the limit. I sat in the machine, and they strapped me in. Dr. Felix put a helmet on my head and told me to relax. That's when it started. The machine lit up, and I felt a weird sensation, like I was falling but not moving. Images flashed before my eyes, too fast to understand. I heard screams and laughter, but I couldn't tell if they were real or in my head. I don't know how long it lasted, but when it stopped, I felt different, like something inside me had changed. Dr. Felix looked at me with a smile that sent chills down my spine. He said the experiment was a success and that I was free to go. I stumbled out of that building, feeling dizzy and confused. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. That night, I had the worst nightmares of my life. I saw the machine, Dr. Felix's twisted smile, and shadows lurking in every corner. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding out of my chest. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I kept seeing things that weren't there. I started to wonder if the experiment had done something to me, something permanent. I decided to go back to the building, to confront Dr. Felix and demand answers. But when I got there, the building was empty, like no one had been there for years. The flyer, the experiments, Dr. Felix, it was like they never existed. I don't know what happened to me in that experiment, and I'm not sure I want to find out. But every time I look in the mirror, I can't help but wonder if what I see is really me or something else, something they created. I never thought much about the lake in our small town. It was just there, like an old forgotten postcard. But that changed one summer night. It was hot, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin. I couldn't sleep, so I figured a walk would help. The town was asleep, and I found myself drawn to the lake, a silver mirror under the moonlight. There, I saw my reflection. But it wasn't me, not really. The reflection had my face, my clothes, but its eyes, they were cold, lifeless. It was doing something unthinkable, hurting someone. I blinked, and it was just me again, standing there, freaked out. I ran home, my heart pounding out of my chest. It had to be a trick of the light, a weird shadow, anything but what I thought I saw. The next day, I couldn't shake the image. I tried to focus on normal stuff, hanging out with friends, playing video games, but my mind kept drifting back to the lake. That night, I found myself there again, like it was calling me. My reflection was normal at first. Then it changed, showing me with a wicked grin, doing things I couldn't even dream of. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Was I going crazy? What was wrong with that lake? I started asking around, casually, about the lake. Most people shrugged it off, but old Mr. Jenkins, the town's unofficial historian, had a different reaction. He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear, and simply said, "Be careful around that lake." That night I went back. I had to know. The reflection was waiting for me, its sinister grin wider. It whispered things, horrible things, urging me to do them. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a reflection. It was something else, something evil. I tried to stay away, but I was drawn to the lake every night. Each time the reflection grew bolder, more violent. It was like it was feeding off my fear, becoming stronger. One night, it stepped out of the lake. I froze, my body refusing to move. It was me, but not me. It laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold, and started walking towards the town. Panic set in. I had to stop it, whatever it was. I followed, keeping my distance. It moved with purpose, heading towards my friend's house. No, I thought. Not him. I don't know where the courage came from, but I ran at it, tackling it to the ground. We struggled, but it was like fighting myself. Just as it got the upper hand, the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon. The reflection screamed, a sound that was both mine and not mine. It vanished, like smoke in the wind, leaving me alone on the ground, panting. The next day I went to see Mr. Jenkins. He listened, his face growing paler with every word. When I finished, he sighed, a heavy, burdened sigh. "The lake," he began, "has always been a bit off. Folks in the old days used to say it showed your true self. But something happened, something dark. It started showing not who we are, but who we could be, in the worst possible way." He looked at me, his eyes serious. "You've got to be careful, son. That lake, it's more than just water and reflections. It's a gateway, a mirror to our darkest desires. You've faced it once, but it'll be back, hungrier. You've got to be strong, resist it." I nodded, more scared than I'd ever been. The lake wasn't just a lake. It was a test, a dangerous, terrifying test of who I was, who I could be. All right, so let me tell you about this messed up thing that happened to us. We were just a bunch of guys, nothing special, and we thought we found the perfect hideout. An old abandoned hospital. Sounded like a genius idea at the time, you know? But man, it turned into a real nightmare. We found the place late at night, and it looked all run down and forgotten. Perfect for laying low, we thought. We weren't the type to ask questions, just wanted a spot to crash without anyone breathing down our necks. Little did we know, that hospital had a dark history. First few nights were quiet, just us laughing, cracking open some beers. But then, things started getting weird. Shadows moving where they shouldn't. Weird sounds echoing in the halls. We all felt it, this heavy vibe, like the place was watching us. One night, Tommy, he was the tough guy in the gang, starts telling us he's hearing whispers. We laugh it off, thinking he's messing with us. But the guy looks scared, real scared. Swears he's hearing voices that ain't ours. The atmosphere, it changed. It wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was like the air itself had this creepy weight to it. Even the bravest among us started glancing over their shoulders, like we were being followed. One by one, strange things kept happening. Tools disappearing, strange markings on the walls. But the real kicker was when we found this old room tucked away in the hospital. Looked like it hadn't seen daylight in decades. We opened the door, and this chill hits us, like stepping into a freezer. In that room we find files, records of some messed up stuff. Criminal activities, secret deals, you name it. Turns out, this hospital wasn't just abandoned. It was a cover for some serious shady business. Our hideout wasn't so innocent after all. The tension, it spiked. Paranoia kicked in like a bad drug. Every creak, every sound set us on edge. We started accusing each other, pointing fingers. The trust we thought we had gone in an instant. One night things really go south. We're sitting around, tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. That's when it happens. Tony, one of our guys, starts talking to someone who ain't there. Full-on arguing, swearing he sees ghosts. We think he's losing it, but then he starts spilling secrets. Stuff only we knew. Turns out, those ghosts, or whatever they were, dug into our pasts. Knew about the stuff we wanted to keep buried. That's when the real horror kicked in. The ghosts, they played with our minds, whispering about betrayal, revenge, all that dark stuff. We turned on each other like hungry dogs fighting for a scrap. Every night it got worse. We'd hear footsteps in the empty halls, see shadows lurking in the corners. It was like the ghosts wanted us to turn on each other, tear ourselves apart. Tommy, the tough guy who first heard the whispers, he was the first to snap. Started seeing things that weren't there, talking to people who'd been dead for years. It was like the hospital's twisted history was playing out in front of us. Betrayal became the norm. We'd hide things, lie to each other, all while the ghosts danced in the background, reveling in our misery. It wasn't just about hiding from the world anymore, it was about hiding from ourselves. The gang, once tight-knit, fell apart piece by piece. Fear turned friends into enemies. Trust became a rare commodity. We were drowning in a nightmare of our own making. And then, the hospital seemed to feed on it. It became a breeding ground for our darkest fears, a place where the ghosts of our past wouldn't let us forget. We were haunted by our own deeds, unable to escape the twisted history of the hospital. I needed extra cash, so I decided to sell my old camera gear on Craigslist. A buyer named Alex responded, offering a generous amount for the equipment. We agreed to meet in a quiet alley behind a deserted warehouse. Ignoring the nagging feeling in my gut, I headed to the meetup, anticipating a quick and easy transaction. As I arrived, the alley felt like a forgotten realm. Graffiti-covered walls loomed over me, and a flickering streetlight cast eerie shadows. Alex stood in the shadows, obscured by a hooded jacket, making it impossible to see their face. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the gloomy atmosphere. We exchanged pleasantries, and I handed over the camera gear. Alex inspected it meticulously, their movements rigid. Something about their demeanor felt off, but I attributed it to cautiousness. As we finalized the deal, Alex's expression shifted from stoic to sinister. Before I could react, they lunged at me with unexpected ferocity. A glint of a knife reflected in the dim light. Panic set in as I realized the Craigslist transaction had taken a dark turn. Instinctively, I dodged the blade, narrowly escaping a potentially fatal strike. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I sprinted through the alley, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I navigated the labyrinthine streets, desperate to evade the mysterious assailant. Fear fueled my every step, pushing me to the edge of exhaustion. It felt like a sinister game, the shadows conspiring against me as I raced to escape the clutches of a seemingly ordinary Craigslist deal turned deadly. In the maze of the city, I sought refuge in a crowded diner, blending into the bustling anonymity. Heart pounding, I scanned the faces, paranoia whispering that Alex might be among them. My trembling hands clutched the phone as I dialed the police, recounting the chilling encounter in hushed tones. Officers arrived promptly, their stern expressions mirroring the gravity of the situation. They assured me they would investigate, but the looming sense of danger lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cryptic transaction had unleashed a malevolent force determined to silence me. Days turned into restless nights as I lived in constant fear, glancing over my shoulder at every shadow. The police investigation yielded no leads, and the anonymity of the Craigslist encounter became a haunting presence. I couldn't escape the gnawing dread that Alex might strike again, lurking in the periphery of my life. The once familiar surroundings became a labyrinth of paranoia. Every unfamiliar face triggered an adrenaline-fueled response, and the city I once called home transformed into a sinister landscape. Sleep became elusive, replaced by the haunting echoes of footsteps and the glint of a knife in the dimly lit alley. As weeks passed, my nerves frayed and my sanity teetered on the edge. I withdrew from friends and family, the weight of the undisclosed danger consuming me. The incident became a specter, haunting my every waking moment, a constant reminder of the vulnerability hidden within mundane transactions. In a desperate attempt to regain control, I turned to a private investigator. Together, we delved into the shadows of the Craigslist encounter, tracing digital breadcrumbs and unraveling the cryptic identity of Alex. The investigation led to dead ends, a frustrating loop of false leads and obscured trails. It seemed the assailant was adept at hiding in plain sight. As the search intensified, I received an anonymous message, a cryptic warning that delving deeper would have dire consequences. Paralyzed by fear, I hesitated, torn between uncovering the truth and succumbing to the ominous threats. The line between safety and peril blurred, and the relentless pursuit of answers pushed me deeper into the abyss of uncertainty. In a final act of defiance, I confronted the shadows, determined to unmask the face behind the Craigslist nightmare. The investigation led to a dilapidated warehouse, reminiscent of the alley where the ominous transaction took place. The air was thick with tension as I cautiously stepped inside, guided by a lingering instinct to confront the lurking danger. In the heart of the warehouse, I found a makeshift lair, a chilling tableau of photographs, news clippings, and a meticulous timeline of my life. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. The assailant had been watching, waiting, orchestrating a macabre symphony of surveillance. The cryptic transaction wasn't just about money. It was a prelude to a twisted obsession. As the pieces fell into place, I uncovered the identity of Alex. A face I never expected, someone close, someone I had unwittingly invited into the intimate details of my life. The betrayal cut deep. The realization that the Craigslist encounter was a carefully calculated scheme, a vendetta concealed beneath the guise of a simple transaction. Late one night, I found myself on that lonesome highway folks always talk about, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the hum of my tired engine. Now, I ain't one for believing in spooky tales, but the locals always said strange things happen on this stretch of road. As I'm cruising along, I see her, this woman standing on the roadside. She looked like any regular person, probably just trying to get somewhere. I'm thinking, why not be a good Samaritan and offer her a ride? Little did I know, that decision would turn my night into something out of a horror flick. She hops in, polite and all, thanking me for stopping. Now, she looked normal, but something was off. Her eyes, they held this distant look, like she wasn't entirely there. She tells me she's headed to the next town, and I figure it's no big deal, just trying to be helpful. As we're driving, she starts talking about the accident, the one that took her life years ago. My grip on the wheel tightens. I mean, what in the world is she on about? But she goes on, describing the crash in vivid detail, like she was there and not just a ghost hitchhiker from the beyond. I'm trying to brush it off, thinking it's just some weird small talk. But then, the air in the car changes. It gets cold, bone-chilling cold. I can see my breath, and I'm wondering if I picked up a ghost instead of a hitchhiker. She goes silent, staring out the window. The tension in the air is thick enough to cut with a knife. I try to make small talk, crack a joke to lighten the mood, but it's like she's not hearing me. The car feels heavy, like we're carrying more than just two people. Suddenly, she points to a spot up ahead, insisting it's where the accident happened. I look, but there's nothing there, just darkness and the endless road. She starts sobbing, real Eerie-like, and I'm starting to regret my decision to play Good Samaritan on this creepy night. I ask if she wants me to drop her off somewhere, maybe the next gas station, but she just keeps crying. It's like her grief is swallowing up the whole dang car. I'm feeling uneasy, to say the least, but I figure we're almost at the town, and I can be rid of this bizarre encounter. As we approach the supposed accident site, things get weirder. The temperature in the car drops even more, and I can see my breath forming misty clouds. Then, out of nowhere, a cold wind rushes through the car, and I swear I hear whispers, like voices from the other side. I hit the gas, wanting to put distance between us and whatever ghostly gathering we stumbled into. But the more I drive, the colder it gets. Ice starts forming on the windows, and I'm panicking, wondering if I'll make it out of this ordeal with my sanity intact. The woman beside me, she ain't crying no more. Instead, she's looking right at me with those empty eyes, and I feel a shiver crawl up my spine. I tell her we're almost at the town, hoping that'll make her disappear or something. But she just points ahead, her ghostly hand trembling. Suddenly, I see it. A shadowy figure on the road, like a specter emerging from the darkness. I slam on the brakes, heart pounding in my chest. The figure, it looks just like her, the hitchhiker. But it's transparent, like a foggy memory come to life. I always loved the unknown, the thrill of exploring where others haven't. When I heard about the newly discovered cave system in Lake Serene, I couldn't resist. I've been a scuba diver for years, but nothing prepared me for what I found there. The first dive was mesmerizing. The underwater caves were vast, stretching into darkness. I felt like an astronaut in an alien world. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth from the ceiling, and the water was crystal clear, creating an illusion of flying as I swam deeper. It was on my third dive that things began to get strange. I noticed a narrow passage that I hadn't seen before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I squeezed through. That's when I first experienced it, a momentary flicker, like a glitch in reality. For a split second, I thought I saw another diver ahead of me, but when I blinked, they were gone. I brushed it off as a trick of light or a shadow, but as I ventured deeper, the flickers became more frequent. Each time, they lasted longer. I saw figures swimming beside me, only to vanish when I turned to look. I heard muffled voices, but when I listened closely, there was only silence. It was disorienting, and a chill ran through me despite the warmth of my suit. I should have turned back, but I was drawn deeper by an inexplicable force. That's when I found the first artifact, an old, rusted camera wedged between two rocks. It seemed out of place, a relic in this pristine environment. I remembered then the rumors of a missing expedition that had come to explore these caves years ago. They had never resurfaced. The deeper I went, the stronger the visions became. I saw glimpses of that expedition, divers with wide, fearful eyes, their flashlights flickering in the murky depths. I heard their panicked breaths, felt their fear as if it were my own. It was as if the cave was showing me its memories. Then time itself began to distort. I'd swim through a passage, only to find myself back where I started. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes stretched into hours. My compass spun wildly, unable to find north. I was lost in a maze, trapped in a cycle of repeating corridors and dead ends. Panic set in. My breathing became rapid. My heart raced. I knew I had to conserve air, but fear was taking over. In my frenzied state, I stumbled upon a cavern, larger than any I'd seen before. In the center, there was something unimaginable, a swirling vortex of water, suspended in the middle of the cave like a liquid tornado. Drawn to it, I approached, and the visions intensified. The missing divers were there, swimming around the vortex, their faces contorted in terror. They reached out to me, mouths opening in silent screams. I felt a pull, a desire to join them, to uncover the secrets they had found. But a voice inside me screamed to escape, to break free from the hypnotic dance of death. I used every ounce of strength I had to swim away from the vortex. The visions faded as I retreated, the voices silenced. It was a grueling journey back, fighting against disorientation and exhaustion. When I finally emerged from the cave, gasping for air, the world seemed different, brighter, more real. I knew I couldn't go back there. Whatever dwelled in those depths was beyond human understanding, a force that toyed with time and reality. Back on land, I reported the camera and the vortex to the authorities. They sent a team to investigate, but they found nothing. The passage I'd squeezed through was gone, as if it had never existed. The camera was untraceable, its images lost to corrosion and time. I still dive, but I avoid Lake Serene. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the muffled voices of the lost divers, calling me back to the depths. I ignore them, knowing that some mysteries are best left undiscovered. The depths hold secrets that are not meant for the world of the living, and I was lucky to escape their grasp. I remember it was a chilly evening in November. The city was alive with lights and sounds, but inside the McDonald's on 5th Street, it was just another busy night. Lisa, was there to grab a quick bite before heading to the library for a night of studying. The place was packed with all sorts of people, and I found a spot near the window. That's when I first saw him. This guy, probably in his late 30s, dressed in a coat that was a bit too heavy for the weather. He stood out to me because he kept looking over at this girl sitting by herself. She looked about my age, maybe younger, with headphones on and her eyes fixed on her phone. I remember thinking she must be waiting for someone. Let's call her Alice. As I ate my fries, I couldn't help but notice the guy inching closer to Alice. Every time she glanced up, he'd look away, but as soon as she was distracted, his eyes were back on her. It was weird, you know? Like, really weird. Alice seemed to feel it too. She shifted in her seat, pulled her jacket tighter around her. But the guy, he just got braver. He moved to a table closer to her, trying to start a chat. Alice wasn't having it, though. She kept her answers short, clearly uncomfortable. I texted my friend about it, saying something like, "Creepy guy at MacD's, bad vibes." My friend was like, "Stay out of it." But I couldn't just sit there. When Alice got up to throw her trash away, the guy followed her. That was it for me. I left my stuff and walked right up to her, acting all friendly and loud. "Alice, OMG, it's been forever." Her eyes were wide with confusion, but she played along. I linked my arm with hers and steered her away from the guy. He looked surprised, annoyed even, but he backed off, leaving his unfinished meal and heading out into the night. Alice and I sat back down, and I explained why I'd done that. She was shaking a bit, thanking me over and over. We hung out for a while after that, talking about random stuff, trying to shake off the creepy encounter. Turns out Alice was new in town, didn't know many people. We exchanged numbers, promising to hang out again. Later, when I walked home, I kept looking over my shoulder. The streets felt different, like shadows were watching. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling lingered. The next day, Alice texted me. She'd seen the guy again near her apartment. This time she was really scared. We met up, and I told her we should report it, but she didn't want to involve the cops. She said she'd probably just overreacted. I didn't think so. That night at McDonald's wasn't normal. I felt it in my gut. Something was off about that guy. Something more than just being a creep. We started hanging out more, partly because we got along, partly because Alice didn't feel safe alone. I didn't mind. It felt good to be there for someone. But things got weirder. I'd see that coat, the same heavy one the guy wore, out of the corner of my eye, disappearing around corners or down subway entrances. Every time I'd look properly, there'd be nothing there. I told Alice, and she got more frightened. She said she'd seen him too. Always just a glimpse. Always when she was alone. It was like he was taunting us, playing some sick game. Then one night, it all came to a head. Alice called me, panic in her voice. He was there, outside her building. I raced over, heart pounding, anger and fear mixing in my chest. But when I got there, the street was empty. No sign of the guy, just the cold night air and the distant sound of traffic. Alice was at her window, phone in hand, tears streaming down her face. The days that followed were tense. We stuck together, always looking over our shoulders. The city felt different, hostile, like it was hiding something sinister in plain sight. In the end, we never saw the guy again. But the fear he brought into our lives stayed with us. We'd been marked by something unexplainable, a darkness that lurked in the everyday. That McDonald's, the city, it all feels different to me now. I'm more cautious, more aware. You never know what's hiding in the crowd, what eyes might be watching you, waiting for a moment to strike. I never thought my boring life in our sleepy town would turn into a scene from a thriller movie, but here I am, hiding in my room, writing this down just in case. It all started about a week ago. My room is right next to the thin wall we share with the neighbors, the Sebastians. They're this quiet, kind of weird couple. I never paid them much mind until that night. I was trying to sleep when their voices seeped through the wall. It was Mr. Sebastian's voice, hushed but frantic. "We can't keep doing this. It's getting too risky." I know I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear more. Mrs. Sebastian's voice was calmer, almost cold. "We don't have a choice. It's done. We move on with the plan." Plan? What plan? My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to convince myself they were talking about some boring adult stuff, but their tone, it was sinister. The next few days, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I started noticing little things. The way they hurriedly closed their garage as soon as they drove in. The late-night digging sounds in their backyard. And then, the big red flag, even park it outside their house, unloading boxes at midnight. I decided to do a bit more snooping. I know it's wrong, but I had to know what was up. I waited until it was late and they were likely asleep. I crept outside, using the shadows to hide. My heart raced, and my hands were all sweaty. As I got closer to their backyard, I heard a muffled sound, like someone crying? My blood ran cold. I peered over the fence, and there it was. A hole, maybe a grave, and next to it, those boxes from the van. Panicking, I rushed back to my room, my mind racing. Were the Sebastians criminals? What were in those boxes? Was someone in danger? I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, I decided to keep an eye on the Johnsons. I skipped school, pretending to be sick. I watched from my window as they left the house together. This was my chance. I sneaked into their backyard. The hole was now filled, but the dirt looked freshly turned. My hands shook as I started digging. I had to know what was buried there. I was halfway through when I heard a voice behind me. "What do you think you're doing?" I spun around. It was Mr. Sebastian, his face twisted in anger. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. I heard something, thought it was a dog, stuck," I stammered. He didn't buy it. He grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight. "You're coming with me." He dragged me inside their house. I tried to fight, but he was too strong. Inside, Mrs. Sebastian waited, her expression unreadable. "We can't let him go," she said quietly. "He knows too much." My heart sank. This was it. I was in deep trouble. Mr. Johnson's eyes softened a bit. "Kid, we're not going to hurt you, but you need to understand. This is bigger than you." They explained then. They weren't criminals, but undercover agents. The boxes, the hole, the late-night activities, it was all part of a sting operation to catch a major crime syndicate. The digging sound? They were planting surveillance equipment. I couldn't believe it. All this time, I thought they were the bad guys, but they were actually trying to stop the real bad guys. And I had almost messed it all up. They made me promise not to tell anyone, for my safety and theirs. As I left their house, my head spinning, I realized how quickly I had jumped to conclusions, how dangerous curiosity could be. But I was also relieved. Relieved that I wasn't living next to criminals, and relieved that I was out of danger. Or so I thought. The very next day, the real twist came. I overheard the Sebastians again, but this time their tone was different. They were arguing, and one phrase caught my attention. "The kid knows too much. He could ruin everything." That's when it hit me. They weren't undercover agents. That was just another lie, a cover story to keep me quiet. Now I'm really in trouble. I don't know who they are or what they're planning, but I know I'm in their way. I'm writing this down as a record, just in case something happens to me. I wish I had minded my own business. Now I'm caught in this dangerous game, not knowing whom to trust, and every creak in the house, every shadow makes my heart race. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm scared. Really scared. Mrs. Thompson was kind of a mystery in our street. She lived alone and didn't talk to anyone. Lately, though, she started acting weirder, wandering around at odd hours, talking to herself. People whispered she had dementia or something. The Johnsons, being the nicest people on the block, decided to check on her one day. They asked me to join because I'm young and might help if there was any heavy lifting. I agreed, thinking it would be a quick visit. When we entered Mrs. Thompson's house, it was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with dust, and it felt like the house was stuck in time. Mrs. Thompson was sitting in her rocking chair, staring into nothing. While Mrs. Johnson made tea, Mr. Johnson and I decided to have a quick look around, make sure everything was safe. That's when we found it, a door, hidden behind a heavy curtain, locked tight. We asked Mrs. Thompson about it, but she just mumbled something about keeping it shut. My curiosity was piqued. I found some old keys on a rusty hook in the kitchen and started trying them one by one. After what felt like hours, one key clicked. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dusty room. It was like a time capsule, old toys, a small bed, and photos on the walls. It looked like it belonged to a child. The air got colder as we stepped inside. Mr. Johnson picked up a photo, and his face went pale. It was a photo of a little boy, smiling, but the face, it was hauntingly familiar. It was Tommy, a kid from our neighborhood who went missing decades ago. The whole town searched for him, but he was never found. Mrs. Johnson gasped, dropping her tea. The sound of it shattering seemed to snap Mrs. Thompson out of her daze. She started screaming, telling us to leave the room, her eyes wild with fear. We backed out, closing the door behind us. Mrs. Thompson was shaking, tears streaming down her face. She started talking, her words spilling out in a rush. She told us Tommy was her grandson, that he used to visit her every summer. But one summer, something went wrong. She never explained what, just that he was gone, and she locked up his room to keep the memories in. We didn't know what to do. The room felt like a tomb, holding secrets of a past tragedy. The air was heavy with unspoken words and hidden truths. Mrs. Thompson begged us not to tell anyone, her voice breaking with each word. We left the house, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't shake the image of that room, the feeling of stepping into a forgotten part of someone's life. The next day, Mrs. Thompson was found in her garden, motionless. It was like she had given up on life the moment her secret was out. The authorities came, but they never found anything conclusive. The room was empty when they checked it. No toys, no photos, nothing. Like it never existed. We arrived just before dusk, the cabin looking all rustic and cool, like something out of a movie. We settled in, unpacking our stuff and getting the party stuff ready. Leo was all smiles, digging the surprise. Night fell, and the real fun began. Music, laughs, and Leo's favorite, chocolate cake. But as we were about to dig into the cake, a loud thump upstairs made us freeze. Probably just a raccoon or something, Leo joked, trying to ease the tension. We laughed it off, but the mood had shifted. Later, as we sat around telling stories, Mia brought up the cabin's history. You know this place is super old, right? Like it belonged to some loner who vanished. The way she said it, with a mix of excitement and fear, made my skin crawl. Tasha rolled her eyes. Please, not another one of your creepy tales. But the night had more in store for us. Strange things started happening. We heard footsteps above, even though we were all in the living room. Doors creaked open when nobody was near them. And the weirdest thing, we found old photographs in a drawer, pictures of people who looked sad, their eyes following us around the room. I tried to stay cool, but my heart was racing. The climax hit when Leo went to grab more drinks from the kitchen. A scream shattered our chatter. We rushed in to find Leo, white as a sheet, staring at the wall. There, written in what looked like old, dried-up red paint, was a message: leave or stay forever. Panic set in. We argued about leaving or staying. Tasha wanted to bail, but Mia was against it. thinking it was some prank by locals. I didn't know what to think. Leo, usually the bravest of us, was quiet, his eyes fixed on the message. We decided to stick together and stay the night, too scared to venture into the woods in the dark. We locked all the doors, huddled in the living room, our festive mood long gone. Every creak and crack made us jump. It felt like the cabin itself was alive, watching us, toying with us. As dawn approached, things escalated. Tasha woke us all, claiming she saw someone outside the window. A shadow, a figure, just standing there. We rushed to see, but there was nothing, just the eerie stillness of the forest. Exhausted and scared, we agreed to leave as soon as the sun was up. Packing our stuff, we heard a low, haunting melody. It was coming from the attic. Leo, gathering some courage, decided to check it out. I went with him, my heart pounding in my throat. The attic was a scene from a horror movie. Old furniture, dust everywhere, and in the corner, a music box, its melody chilling the air. Leo reached out to close it, but as he did, a gust of wind blew through the room, sending papers flying. Among them, a newspaper clipping, old and yellowed, caught my eye. It was an article about the cabin's owner, the loner Mia mentioned. He wasn't just a hermit. He was a musician who lost his family in a tragic fire. The cabin was the only thing left of his past. The reality hit us hard. All the weirdness, the photos, the message, the music. It was like the cabin was reliving its tragic past. We bolted downstairs, telling the others it was time to leave, now. But as we gathered our last bits, a deafening crash echoed through the cabin. The front door. It had slammed shut on its own, the locks jamming. We were trapped. Panic turned to hysteria. Tasha was crying. Mia was trying to break a window, and Leo was just standing there, staring at the front door, his face pale. That's when we heard it. A voice, faint but clear, singing a haunting melody. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. We froze, the voice enveloping us, its sadness piercing our souls. We decided to leave at first light. No one slept much that night, every noise making us jump. We were all thinking it. This cabin was creepy, but it wasn't supernatural. It was just old and settling, and our minds were playing tricks on us. Come morning, we were exhausted, but determined to get out of there. As we packed up, I couldn't help but feel silly about how freaked out we got. Leo joked about it, trying to lighten the mood. Best birthday ever, right? He laughed, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We checked the place one last time, making sure we hadn't left anything behind. The old photographs, the music box in the attic, the strange message. They were all still unnerving. But in the daylight, they lost some of their menacing power. As we locked the cabin door, Mia mused, maybe this place just has a lot of history, you know? It's not haunted, just old. Her words made sense. The cabin wasn't haunted. It was just a place with a past, and we let our imaginations run wild. The drive back was quiet, everyone lost in their thoughts. We were relieved to be heading home, but there was an unspoken agreement that we had let our fears get the better of us. When we finally got back to the city, we promised to plan a less eventful birthday party next time. We laughed about it, but I think we all felt a bit shaken. It was a reminder that sometimes fear is just in our minds, and an old cabin in the woods is just that. An old cabin, nothing more. Home alone, I caught a weird noise, like a scratchy fingernail on the window. Made me jump. I sneaked to check, peeked out, and there it was, a person in a messed up coat staring at me. My breath caught when I saw the face. It was someone I buried not long ago. Panic hit me hard. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a bad dream, but nope. The figure was there, eyes hollow, staring like they had something to say. I locked eyes, fear crawling under my skin. How could this be real? I buried them, said my goodbyes, but now they were outside my window, haunting me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. Had to be a prank, right? Someone playing sick games. But no one knew about the person I buried. It was my secret, my burden. Goosebumps crawled on my arms as I tried to figure out what was going on. I closed the curtains, thinking it might be my imagination playing tricks. Sat down, tried to shake off the unease. But then, a knock on the window. A slow, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. Each knock echoed like a ghost from the past. I mustered the courage to look, hoping it was gone, but no luck. The figure was still there, staring, demanding something. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, ready to dial someone, anyone. But when I glanced back at the window, it was different. The figure was inside now, standing in the corner. My stomach churned. How did they get in? My locked-up home was supposed to be a fortress. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The figure didn't move, just kept staring. Silent, eerie. I tried to speak, ask what they wanted, but no words came out. I was trapped in a horror scene, the walls closing in. The room felt colder, the air thick with the weight of the impossible. I eyed the window, thinking maybe I could escape. But as I moved, the figure moved too, blocking the way. It wasn't a person. It was something else. Something that defied everything I thought I knew. I reached for the door, fingers trembling. The figure was right behind me now, its presence suffocating. I turned the knob, opened the door, and ran like my life depended on it. Down the hallway, out the building, anywhere but there. Outside, the night was chilly. My breath puffed out in panicked gasps. I kept running, not daring to look back. Maybe it was a nightmare, a crazy hallucination. But then, footsteps echoed behind me. I dared a glance, the figure still there, following like a shadow. I sprinted to the cemetery, hoping the familiar grounds would offer safety. As I reached the gate, I realized the footsteps were gone. My legs wobbled as I caught my breath. I thought I had escaped, but then I heard a voice, hollow, distant, calling my name. I turned, and there it was, the figure at the cemetery gate. My mind raced, heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. I left it behind, buried it deep, but it stood there, reaching out like a ghostly echo from the grave. I stumbled backward, my thoughts a whirlwind. It shouldn't exist, shouldn't be here. I ran through the streets, away from the cemetery, away from that haunting figure. But every time I glanced back, it was there, following, waiting. Exhausted, I reached my friend's place, pounded on the door. They opened, concern etched on their face. I tried explaining, but the words tumbled out in a jumble. They let me in, offered comfort, but I knew deep down that the figure was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Days passed, but the haunting didn't stop. The figure appeared in reflections, in the corner of my eye. No matter where I went, it followed, a constant reminder of a reality I couldn't comprehend. Friends thought I was losing it, but I knew the truth. The figure from the cemetery had found a way back. Sleep was elusive. Nightmares haunted my nights. The figure whispered in the darkness, a ghostly presence that refused to be ignored. I sought help, talked to experts, but no one had answers. The figure wasn't of this world, and it wanted something I couldn't fathom. One night, as I lay in bed, the figure materialized at the foot. Its eyes, void of life, locked onto mine. It spoke, a soundless voice that echoed in my mind. "You can't escape. I need what you took from me." I shivered, realizing it wasn't here for revenge. It was here for something I unknowingly possessed. Late at night, I'm trucking down this long, lonesome highway. Headlights cut through the dark like a knife, and my radio's crackling with that familiar static. Nothing special, just me, my rig, and endless asphalt. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, the air gets thick. My radio starts acting up, spitting out weird signals like it's possessed. Distress calls, pleas for help, echoes of panic. Now, I ain't one to believe in ghosts, but this ain't your regular radio chatter. I figure it's some interference, maybe a storm messing with the waves. But these voices, they're real. I fiddle with the dial, trying to make sense of the words tangled in the static. Someone's out there, lost, scared, and they're broadcasting their fear into the night. I should have turned it off, kept on driving, but curiosity's a powerful thing. So, I keep listening, the voices piercing through the darkness, painting a picture of desperation. My grip tightens on the wheel, and the road stretches ahead, a ribbon of uncertainty. The voices ain't stopping, and now the highway's playing tricks. Shadows dance on the edges, like specters in the night. I rub my eyes, blink hard, but they linger. I'm telling myself it's fatigue, that trucker's exhaustion, but deep down, I know better. The radio keeps spitting out these cryptic messages, like secrets carried by the wind. I hear names, places, fragments of stories. Someone's out there, somewhere, and they need help. But the more I listen, the more the road changes. Street signs twist into unfamiliar shapes. Exits appear where they shouldn't. It's like I'm driving through a maze designed by a twisted mind. Panic claws at my throat, but I'm glued to the radio, addicted to those desperate voices in the ether. And then I see 'em. Figures on the shoulder, flickering like old TV static. I blink, and they're gone. My eyes playing tricks on me, I reckon. But the voices, they're louder now, spilling into the cab like spilled gasoline. I hit the gas, trying to outrun the unease, but the road's stretching longer than it should. It's like I'm trapped in some loop, driving, but never getting anywhere. The highway signs mock me, changing directions like they got a life of their own. My headlights catch glimpses of things, shapes on the roadside, shadows wearing faces, looking at me with hollow eyes. I rub my eyes again, but the shadows linger, twisted remnants of nightmares. The radio's buzzing, voices now whispering into my head. Names I recognize but shouldn't, places I've never been but feel like home. My heart's pounding, and the truck hums beneath me like a living thing. I should have pulled over, taken a break, but the highway's got its hooks in me. I see a silhouette in the distance, a hitchhiker maybe. Should have kept going, but the voices, they're demanding I stop. I pull over, hesitating as the figure approaches. A face hidden in shadows, a mouth moving but no sound coming out. I roll down the window, the air outside colder than it should be. The figure points ahead, and the voices urge me to follow. My instincts screaming at me to drive away, but my foot's on the brake, and the highway's got me in its grip. The figure climbs in, and now there's a voice in the cab, whispering secrets, telling tales of lost souls and forgotten roads. I'm listening, gripped by a fascination that feels darker than the night around me. As we drive, the highway warps, reality unraveling like an old sweater. Trees wither and bloom in seconds, the moon playing hide-and-seek with the clouds. I'm not sure if I'm dreaming, but the voices insist I'm wide awake. The figure beside me, it's changing. Faces flash before me, expressions twisted in agony. I try to scream, but the sound's swallowed by the static. The truck accelerates, not under my control. The highway's taken charge, a sentient force guiding me through its twisted veins. All right, so here's the deal. I'm this artist, right? Just trying to make a living with my paints and brushes. Thought setting up a studio in the attic would be perfect, quiet, away from distractions. Just me, the canvas, and my thoughts. I get everything ready, facing my easel toward this big old window. It's perfect during the day, lets in the natural light. I start working on this self-portrait, thinking I could capture something real about myself. But then things start getting weird. I look up from my canvas, catch my reflection in the window, and it ain't right. All distorted, like one of those funky mirrors from a carnival. My eyes are hollow, my smile's twisted. I shake my head, thinking it's just my mind messing with me. Too many late nights and too much caffeine, probably. Back to my painting, I go. But the reflection, it keeps nagging at me. Every time I look up, it's there, all warped and unsettling. But I tell myself it's just my imagination. Stress does weird things to your mind, right? Then, it escalates. The distorted reflection isn't the only thing happening in that window. One day I look up, and there's this figure, a shadowy silhouette standing behind me. I freeze, brushes in hand, heart pounding. It's not my reflection. It's something else, something dark and twisted. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. I turn around, expecting to see the figure in the room with me, but there's nothing, just the empty attic. I look back at the window, and there it is, that figure, grinning at me. Its eyes, pure black, like staring into an abyss. I think it's got to be my imagination, you know? Stress and lack of sleep messing with my head. But when I open my eyes again, it's still there. The figure, staring, grinning. I grab my paints, thinking maybe I can cover up the window, make it go away. As I approach, the figure starts to move. Slow, deliberate steps. I freeze again, watching it come closer. Now it's not just in the window, it's in the room. The air gets colder and I can feel this oppressive energy. I dip my brush in paint, trying to steady my shaking hand. But when I turn back to the canvas, my self-portrait is different. It's not me anymore. It's the figure, the twisted, horrifying version in the window. I didn't paint it, but there it is, staring back at me. Panic sets in. I start covering the canvas, trying to erase that thing, but it won't go away. I turn to face the figure, and it's right there, inches from me. Cold breath on my neck. I stumble back, knocking over paints and brushes. It's like the attic's closing in, suffocating me. The figure starts to speak, a low, guttural whisper. Can't make out the words, but it's like nails on a chalkboard. I'm cornered, nowhere to run. It's like the attic's become its own nightmare. Suddenly the lights flicker, and the figure vanishes. I'm left alone in the dark, heart pounding, covered in paint. I grab my stuff and bolt out of the attic, slamming the door shut. Downstairs I try to make sense of it. Maybe it's stress, maybe it's my mind playing tricks. But then I notice something. The painting I tried to cover up in the attic? It's hanging in the living room now, like it moved by itself. I'm terrified, but I can't leave it there. I grab the painting, take it back to the attic, and lock the door. But it doesn't stop. The figure keeps appearing in my paintings, each one more twisted than the last. I'm losing sleep, scared to go back to the attic. But I can feel it calling me, like this dark force pulling me back. I try to resist, but it's like the attic has a hold on me. One night I can't take it anymore. I go back to the attic, and there it is, the figure, waiting for me. The whispers get louder, and I can finally make out the words. It's telling me things, secrets, things I don't want to know. I try to paint over the figure, erase it from the canvas. But it won't let me. The figure steps out of the painting, looming over me. It's real, tangible, and I can feel its icy touch. It speaks again, telling me my darkest fears, my deepest regrets. It knows everything. I'm paralyzed, trapped in this nightmare I can't escape. The attic feels like it's closing in, the walls pulsating with the figure's malevolent energy. I'm begging it to stop, to let me go. But it just keeps whispering, and the attic becomes a vortex of darkness. I'm consumed by it, and the figure merges with my own twisted reflection. The last thing I hear is its laughter, echoing through the attic. And then, silence. The attic door swings open, revealing an empty room. The figure is gone, but it's left its mark. I'm not the same anymore. I never liked the night shift at the factory. It's not just the weird hours, but the way everything looks different in the dark. The shadows, the silence, it all gets to you. But hey, a job's a job, right? It was a Thursday night or maybe Friday morning. Time blurs when the world's asleep, and you're stuck with machines for company. There I was, half asleep, half working, when the big press machine started making this strange clunking noise. Not the regular clunk-clunk, but something off. Did you hear that? I asked Sam, who was on the shift with me. He shrugged. Probably nothing. This old junk makes noise all the time. But it wasn't nothing. The noise grew louder, and then with a deafening bang, everything went dark. The machine had blown a fuse or something, plunging us into darkness. Great, muttered Sam, fumbling for his phone. No signal. Typical. We decided to make our way to the exit, but something was off. The layout of the factory seemed different, like the corridors had shifted. We should have reached the door in a few minutes, but it felt like we were walking in circles. Are we lost? I whispered. The dark made me uneasy. Factories aren't meant to be quiet. The silence was unnerving. No, we can't be, Sam insisted, but his voice betrayed his confidence. That's when we heard it. A low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. It was coming from behind us. We froze. Maybe it's just another machine, I said, trying to sound brave. We need to hide, Sam said, pulling me towards a small storage room. We huddled in there, listening. The dragging sound stopped, replaced by a tapping, like someone, or something, tapping on the walls. Tap, 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 moving around the room, surrounding us. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. The factory felt alive, hostile, like it wanted us gone. Sam and I didn't speak. We didn't dare. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A low growl echoed through the walls, a sound so menacing it made my blood run cold. We need to get out, I whispered. Sam nodded. We crept out of the storage room, moving as quietly as we could. The factory was a labyrinth, a maze of metal and shadows. The exit seemed like a distant dream. Then I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, standing at the end of the corridor. It was too dark to make out features, but I knew it wasn't human. It was something else, something wrong. Run! I shouted, and we did. We ran through the corridors, the sound of our footsteps echoing loudly. The figure was chasing us, I could hear it. A metallic clanging, getting closer and closer. We finally saw the exit sign, a beacon of hope. But it was blocked by debris, pieces of the machine that had malfunctioned. We started to move the debris, hands trembling, hearts racing. The clanging was right behind us now. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I'd be frozen in terror. With one final push, we cleared the path and stumbled out into the night. The cool air never felt so good. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, far from the factory.